Sorry, you go.
We are live stream on YouTube now.
Thank you, Juliet. Oh, Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year. 4 minutes before we go live on Zoom.
I like your background, Juliet.
Thank you very much.
Yes, loving that background.
Thank you, Miss Angela.
Well,
It's 6 o'clock.
Thank you for that. We will dive right in. First, want to start by saying Happy New Year to everyone. Glad to see everyone here for this, our first meeting of the Affordable Housing Implementation Committee, this January 6th. Welcome. And we can move into roll call.
Stella Adams. Yvonne Barnes. Laura Beatty.
I'm here.
Thank you. Diane Katati,
Here.
Lucille Constantine. I'm gonna get it right one day.
Here.
S. Nicole Diggs. Tiffany Elder,
Here.
Courtney James. I. Jarvis Martin. Rita R. McDaniel,
Here.
John Parker. Venus Sanders,
Here.
Timothy Stallman.
I'm here.
Thank you. Angela D. Vic Lewis. I saw Angela.
I'm here.
All right, thank you. Roll call is complete.
Perfect. So our agenda today is quite pretty full. We will walk through ground rules in just a bit, but our agenda includes approval of the minutes and then presentations by community development, DHA, and their property updates, MWBE updates from our consultant, a DataWorks presentation on the local market, and a presentation on feedback from the recent council presentation. And then we'll move into discussion and public comments before our wrap up. And for ground rules, just to cover these again, please show respect for others and their opinions, presume goodwill, be fully present, one speaker at a time. All participants will remain muted until called upon. Committee members can raise their hand to speak. We will take 1 to 2 questions from the committee after each presentation if time allows, and if it allows us to remain on the agenda. All other questions can be held until our discussion section at 7:35. Please keep comments brief to allow others to speak as well. Use specific examples and enjoy the process.
Thank you, Tiffany. At this point, I'd like to ask for any comments or corrections on the minutes from November 4, 2021. Don't know if anyone has any adjustments. If not, or hearing none, I'd welcome a motion to approve in a second. Anyone?
I move to approve the minutes.
Thanks, Nicole. Is there a second?
I second.
Thanks, Venus. Okay, at this point, if you could all unmute and all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Hi.
Any opposed? Great, the minutes are approved. Back to you, Tiffany.
Okay, we will move into our first presentation from Community Development Department.
Thank you, Tiffany. First of all, I'd like to say Happy New Year to everyone. Reginald Johnson, Director of the Department of Community Development. Hope everybody had a great and exciting holiday and got some rest, got some good food or whatever it is that works for you. And so welcome back and welcome to 2022. I don't have a PowerPoint because I'm just going to mention 3 things to kick us off. I think one of the most important things that's taken up quite a bit of time, staff time for us that we've been working on, is what will be called the Durham Rent Relief Program. It's not necessarily part of the Forever Home Durham program. However, it is something that's important to our community. As you know, the city had received ERAP dollars, Emergency Rental Assistance Program dollars from the federal government. We had contracted with the county for the first tranche of money, and the county distributed that. And as you may recall, I had shared earlier that the county decided that they would not do ERAP 2, which left us to develop a program. We actually have been working through the holidays and even before the holidays with Legal Aid of North Carolina And so we am pleased to report we've made a great deal of progress, and we hope to open the program within the next, I would say within the next 7 days. And so for persons to participate in the rental relief program with the federal dollars from ERAP 2. And so that's taken a lot of work. It's taken a lot of time for us to try to get that off the ground this time. And but I think we've gotten the program off the way. We, as you remember, needed to contract with Neighborly, software provider, to provide the application software as well as the reporting. And so we've been able to do that and integrate that with Legal Aid of North Carolina. So I'm very pleased about that. And so you will, of course, be hearing news forthcoming as we have more details, but I can say from that we're on the down slope. There was some points I didn't know that we could see the end of the tunnel, but I think we know that we're there. So I'm very happy about that, and so we can open up the year with that. The second thing that I would just mention is you all received information on a request for proposals that we issued last year, $15 million for projects for affordable housing, particularly looking at low-income tax credit projects, 9% and 4%. That was issued. We actually had a meeting on that with interested parties earlier this week. The deadline, I can't remember the date, I think it's February the 1st. And so we put out $15 million in dedicated housing fund, bond funds, and home funds with the intention of supporting 4% and 9% low-income housing tax credits deal to create more affordable housing. So we hope to get some great applications out of that process as we move forward. And then the final thing that I'll mention is that, as you know, the Durham as a community gets one tax credit, a 9% tax credit a year. And we've talked about that before, one of the limitations from the North Carolina Housing and Finance Agency. But what we've decided to do is to, city will partner with McCormick, Barron, Salazar to submit a 9% application for the Lapse at Southside Phase 3. And so that will enable us to close out the project, Southside revitalization project in terms of rental. And so they will be submitting an application later this spring for that project, maybe looking at anywhere from 70 to 100 additional affordable units that we will hope to add to our community and finish that on that site. If you recall, that's the about 7 acres that are remaining after the development of phase 1, which was 132 units, and phase 2, which was 85 units. And but the next phase, final phase, we're actually looking to make all affordable units, all subsidized units. There'll be no mixed income or market rate units in that phase is what we're looking at. So I just wanted to share that. That's where we are to kick off the year. Of course, we have more as the year moves forward, but Happy New Year to everyone, and thank you.
And now we will move to oh, well, actually, are there any questions from the committee? We do have a few minutes available.
I have one.
Mm-hmm.
How is it determined how many units of affordable housing would go into phase 3 of the Lapse of Southside?
That's actually a good question. So we look at a couple of things. Now I might have Karen Lotto to chime in. So one, we look at, of course, the number of acres, how high we can go based upon the zoning, and how many, and then what's there's a cost benefit, cost factor, not benefit, cost factor into that, and what one can afford. And so when you look at all three of those, and then the other piece of that, the fourth part of that is this is particularly for a low income tax credit application, and there are ranges of units that they will support in terms of the application. And so there's some limitations on that, but I'll turn it over to Ms. Lotto to add anything to what I have shared.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. So yes, I mean, Reginald has hit on the key factors. What has driven the number of units is a combination of what will fit on the site, given the need not just to build the units, but to park the building as well. And then what we can get, how much subsidy we can get utilizing the low-income housing tax credit. So essentially between those two things, there is a sweet spot that we've landed at around 100 units that we can fit onto the site in a way that is not inconsistent in appearance with what is next door, and that we can provide enough parking because, and the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency will require us to have a certain amount of parking in order to be competitive for tax credits. And then we're trying to maximize the amount of tax credit subsidy we can get to the project.
Thank you.
Are there any additional questions from the committee? If not, we will move to the DHA property updates. Thank you, Community Development.
Good evening, everyone. And as Reginald and everyone else said, Happy New Year to everyone. We have two big things to talk about today. One being our emergency rental assistance efforts, and two, our project updates. So next slide, please. So our program we call A Fresh Start is the effort that we've had to try to get all of our DHA residents who are behind in rent to apply for any available funding that's there. That started out, of course, initially with the county's money that they had as ERAP 1, as we call it. And we had 370 households who applied for that, and that a total amount that they applied for was $678,000. So far, as you can see here, as of the beginning of the month, we've received about half of those funds. That overall number, including what's been applied for, of families and amount of funds that we're behind in rent on, is about 700 plus families and about $1.3 million. That is how behind folks are currently. This funding from the county obviously helps quite a bit, assuming that we get all that we've applied for. We're still not sure of that yet, but there's no indication that that's not going to be the case as they process this. And as Mr. Johnson spoke of earlier, we are going to be encouraging the remaining families to take full advantage of the ERAP 2 program that's going to be administered via the city and its contracted vendor. We're gearing up now to get the word out, letting folks know that this program is going to be open and that we need each and every one to apply who is eligible to do so that we don't run the risk of having to evict someone for their inability to pay. So we'll continue to do our outreach as we have been with our in-house team to let them know that they need to apply for the funds and or they need to contact DHA's offices so that we can arrange a repayment agreement so that they will be in compliance with their lease. And as I've been saying, HUD has made it clear a couple of things that we cannot do. One, we cannot pay or the rent for them, and we can't forgive that rent. So it is imperative that they actually step forward and take full advantage of this program that exists now. I should mention that we also we know that some of our residents have received assistance outside of the ERAP program. We've had some ecumenical partners out there who have worked with our residents to provide funding as well. And so whatever the source, we just need to make sure that folks are reaching out and making contact with us first and foremost so that we know that they are truly interested in getting caught up, whether they can or not. We just need to know that and then go forth and we can assist them in giving them the time and the circumstances they need to address that. Next slide, please. This next slide you've seen a gazillion times, and it speaks to our larger DHA downtown and neighborhood plan. There are, as you see here, there are 7 different sites, one of which you see at the very bottom of the screen is Southside 3, which Reginald had spoken about. It is not going to be done under our portfolio, but it'll be done through McCormick, Baron, Salazar. But the other 5 sites, the 3 on the left, the 2 on the bottom right, are sites that are directly owned by or controlled by DHA. And we have begun our work with J.J. Henderson, as you all have heard. And we've begun our work on the 519 and Liberty Street sites. And we'll be happy to report here on what's happening with the other 3 sites that you see represented here. So I'm going to turn it over to Anthony Snell, and he'll give you all an update of where we are with our remaining sites, as well as updates on sites that we're currently working on. Anthony, all yours. Anthony, if you're talking, we can't hear you. Next slide, please.
Can you hear me now? Okay, my apologies. As I mentioned to myself, I briefly want to walk you through the progress this evening that we are making with J.J. Henderson Rehab and new construction. And also, as Anthony mentioned, talk to you about the progress that we are making towards 3 other of our sites. We have gone through the developer partner process of selecting our partners for those sites. But next slide, please. At J.J. Henderson on our rehab side, our completion is still scheduled for the 4th quarter of 2022. We have completed 72, a rehab of 72 of the 177 units, which is roughly 41% of the units we have completed the rehab on. Overall, we've completed about 48% of the construction at the site, which includes putting on a new roof, putting in new HVAC systems, and as well, we have moved the management office at the site. The management office and the main entrance will no longer be on Duke Street. It's actually going to be on the side of the building where the old auditorium once existed. Next slide, please. This is, these pictures illustrate some of the improvements that have taken place with the actual units. In the top left-hand corner there, you see the old units as they were configured. You see the old window treatment, the old flooring, and the central HVAC system that was there that we had to switch over in between seasons. Directly below, you see the new finishes in the unit. You see the new window treatment, as well as the new individual HVAC systems in the units. The pictures to the right show in the middle there, it shows the kitchen area before it was rehabbed, and to the far right there, you actually see the finished product, which includes new flooring, new cabinets, and new appliances. Next slide, please. And then to talk about the other construction that's taking place on the site, which is the new construction for the seniors project. The completion is still scheduled for 1st quarter of 2023. We have about 12% of the construction complete at the site, which including the new installation of the stormwater system, complete demolition of the old parking lot in the back, and we are starting to put in the building, the new building foundation for the rendering of the building as you see it in this picture. If you go to the next slide. The slide there in the top left-hand corner is what the site looked like on August the 5th. Some of you may have been out there with us in August when we had when we actually had the announcement of the groundbreaking for the site. This is what it looked like. You can see the progress that we've made since August the 5th. You in the slide immediately below you, if you were looking at this particular slide at the time, you saw the old auditorium. Now that has been demolished. You're actually seeing the new entrance to the building where the new main office is located. And then the two slides to the right in the center and to the far right, actually, this is where the piling driving is taking place for the installation and the start of the foundation for the new building. So we have made a lot of progress on this site since August the 5th. Here, I just want to talk to you briefly about the progress that we've made in the selections of our development partners for the DHA office in the Criminal Justice Resource Center, which is a county site adjacent to our office, Forest Hill Heights and Fayette Place. As you know, we went out for an RFP in June of 2021. The responses were submitted. We had 9 responsive bids that were submitted to us in September. We went through the evaluation process and made a recommendation to our board for approval in December of 2021. Next slide, please. This slide shows the respondents that we received from the firms. Is also highlighted are the selected firms for the 3 sites. For Forest Hill Heights, there was the Integral Group LLC. For Fayette Place, that's Gilbane, Greystone, and F7. And then for the DHA office and CJR Center, it's also the joint venture of Gilbane, Greystone, and F7. Next slide, please. Here, I just wanted to show you the selection committee. These were the individuals that were involved in the process of evaluating the proposals that we received. As you can see, we had broad participation. We had participation from the city of Durham, from Durham County. We had community representative, Mr. Martin, who's also part of this committee. We had a DHA resident, and then of course we had representatives from Durham Housing Authority. Next slide, please. Here, I just want to point out some of the highlights of the proposals that we received from the successful firms that we are proposing to move forward with. And our next step with those firms is to start the negotiations of the master development agreements for each of those sites. Within our process of the RFP process, we had set some minimums for each of those sites that are represented here in this chart. We had a minimum of 1,425 units. The proposals we received total for those selected sites or respondents, I should say, it included over 1,700 units. So we picked up over 300 units more than we had set for our minimum. And also as far as residential space, which is commercial mixed use space, I think we picked up about 77,000 square feet and proposed non-residential square footage for the combined sites. The process was very comprehensive. We feel as though we received the attention of some leading national firms with respect to helping us implement the remainder, well, the second half of the DDMP process. We still have to go through the process of negotiating with these firms, as well as we will have additional community engagement. We have the proposals that we have received thus far gives us I would categorize it as a floor We are going to be making those determinations as we go forward with the planning process of what the final plans will be for the sites, but we are excited with what we have at this point. Any questions?
Before we ask that, I did want to make a couple of points as well. And one, I just want to make sure we're clear that when we talk about the criminal justice site, it's the land around it. We're not at all doing anything with the existing building. It will remain intact. And then the other point is that that particularly is relevant to this group is that of these 3 sites, 2 of them are sites that are targeted for the bond financing. That is the DHA office and criminal justice sites, as well as the Forest Hill Heights site. So of the $59 million that have been targeted for DHA, the remaining balance between those 2 sites is about 44 million of the 59. The remaining 15 or so is for the Main and Liberty Street sites. Any questions?
What's going to be done with the non-residential areas in the locations that you all have? Are there going to be businesses? And if so, what type of businesses would be to occupy those spaces?
The only specific non-residential use that has been identified at this point has been that for the Fayette Place site, there is approximately 20,000 square foot grocery store that is targeted for that site. The remaining non-residential spaces, all that is to be determined.
Thank you.
I have a question about the Fresh Start program. Well, it's actually 3 questions.
Sure.
So what is the time lapse between residents applying for the funding and when they potentially receive funding?
That's unknown, frankly. As you noticed in the presentation, we applied for the funds from the county months ago, and we're still waiting to get all of the funds from the county. That's not something that is detrimental to the residents, though, because once they've applied, then they are basically quote unquote okay. That is, we know that they've applied for funding, and we know we'll give them the grace of waiting for those funds to arrive. And it's the same thing with respect to the city application process, or if they don't have, if they're not eligible for either of those things, but they contact us, we can make arrangements for them to make their rental, the payments that they're behind in. So the key trigger is them contacting DHA so that we can get into a formal arrangement with them, and that will halt any potential eviction process.
Okay, so once a resident applies, are there any reasons that they could be deemed ineligible?
There are, and those are based on the program requirements, and I will pitch that back to the city to talk about what those program requirements are.
Okay, and you answered my other question. It was about the evictions. Does it stall it? But all right, thank you.
You're welcome.
We do have a question in the chat from Tim. It reads, a question for Dr. Scott. Could you walk us through what you mean when you say HUD has told DHA it cannot forgive rent? What would the specific consequences be for DHA if you decided not to evict folks for non-payment?
The Housing Authority has numerous regulations that we have to follow, and collection of rent is one of the criteria for the authority. And so HUD has made it clear, and again, this is not just a DHA issue, this is all housing authorities across the country. They made it clear when the ERAP funds were first made available, even when CARES Act money was first made available, that housing authorities cannot use any of those funds from the CARES Act to pay any rental arrears, and that residents have to pay their rent. Now, they can get their funds from somewhere else, but they can't get them from the housing authority, or we can't forgive that rent. So housing authorities that aren't complying, we are not in compliance. And that can lead to a number of sanctions. One of the things that DHA is currently dealing with is a troubled agency designation. And that is because we have fallen behind in a number of metrics. One of them is the tenant's accounts receivable. And as we've been discussing with the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, how we're going to correct those issues, one of the things that they said is that you must get your, they call it TARs, tenants accounts receivable, you must get your TARs into compliance, which is we're not supposed to have a TARs balance or TARs of less than 98% collection. We're now somewhere in the neighborhood of about 53%. So we're significantly behind. But again, we're not alone. This is a national issue that's going on with respect to everyone dealing with the pandemic, et cetera. But we're still being required to address those issues. So what HUD says is the Housing Authority must do everything within its power to address the TARS issue, which means up to and including eviction.
Great. We have another question from Albert Avery. How much and which funding will be spent on the DHA office project, in particular the cost of the non-residential space associated with the DHA central office?
None of the funding was going to go towards non-residential space. Those funds are geared towards the residential only. And I believe there's some potentially, and this is something we'll be talking to the city about, potentially some of that is around the commercial component on the ground floor that we want to have, because one of the things that all of the properties on Main Street are required to have is some sort of ground floor retail or commercial space. But with respect to DHA's office, that's a separate issue altogether.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for DHA?
Yeah, actually, Anthony, can you talk a little more about the timing of the RFPs, when you'll have your master development agreements, and then when you actually hope to get construction underway, and then ultimately completion of units? Anything you can share on that front?
Sure, we got great crystal balls. We hope to get our negotiations completed with all three respondents within, the goal is within 3 months. And then in terms of when work gets started, that's going to depend on the different proposals and the different phases, because each of those, help me out, Anthony, if I'm off here, each of them has more than one phase. Each site has more than one phase. And so just like how with the Main Street site, we have 5 phases, there will be some number of phases with each of these different sites. I was going to say probably with the exception of DHA office, because it's more or less one building, but that actually has 2 phases to it too, I believe. So all of that will be determined a bit later, once we get through the negotiations, once we understand the final financing plan that each of these will have, whether it's going to be a 4% or a 9% phase. All of those will be important factors. But obviously, we'll be keeping you all updated as we continue our negotiations and get finalized plans from each of those developers. I missed anything there, Anthony?
No, you're fine.
Are there any additional questions? If not, I saw someone enter the room. I don't see her screen up, but I at least want to make mention that Mary Lane O'Neill has joined us in our first meeting of this year. Thank you. And we give you the floor.
Hello. I won't take up a lot of time. I just finished a work session up there, but I did want to come on and wish you all a happy new year. I'm still very much in a learning curve about things, so I just wanted to jump on and kind of listen and figure out what I'm doing in this space and how I am trying to adjust to this new kind of role that I have. So I appreciate you all, and I'm glad to be here, and I'll be listening, but I'm literally just walking into my home, so I am going to try to find something to eat around here. So I'm going to come off screen so I can at least try to stay here. Remember, I'm human. I've forgotten to eat a lot of nights, but Wanda reminded me, you need to eat, Elaine. So I'm going to do that tonight. So I'll be right here listening. Thank you all.
Thank you for joining us, Mayor O'Neill. And with that, we will move to the MWBE updates from UMCNC.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Patrice Gilmore Haley. I am president of United Minority Contractors of North Carolina. I just want to wish each one of you a happy new year. So our group has been working feverishly over the last couple of months, making sure that we do our due diligence in connecting with all the developers and GCs that are working on the Forever Home Durham project. Our team has been working to request any spend data that our general contractors have that are working on the active projects right now. We've requested any upcoming information about procurement opportunities that might be on the horizon so that we can go ahead and get that information out to the general public and give them information about these project opportunities that might be available. We've also provided some language for one of our developers for a new RFP and RFQ that they are hoping to issue so that we can make sure that they're starting out with the right language that sets the stage for the general contractors about what the expectation is when it comes to inclusion of minority and women-owned businesses on the projects. And then finally, we've helped various small businesses already who have shown up on some of the reporting that we've collected so far. But those businesses were not properly certified. So we've been working, members of our team have been working to help get those individuals certified because we believe not only will that be helpful for the participation numbers that are reflected on the Forever Home Durham project, but that also makes them an even better candidate for future projects with the city and other organizations that are in the Triangle area. So we believe that to be really important. And we've already had a few firms that we've reached out to get certified. And then the last thing that we've been working on is just brainstorming training opportunities. A portion of the program that we are hoping to help the city implement is around getting residents to work, particularly around the construction industry, but we're also exploring other ways and opportunities that we might put some of the Durham residents that are beneficiaries of these affordable housing projects to work. And so we've been meeting with a variety of people in some of the agencies surrounding this project to just explore what is the best type of training to offer for the audience that we know that we'll be reaching out to, which we can consider to be a bit largely female. So we want to be mindful of that in terms of what training we're offering that's going to be attractive to that audience. And then we also have been having a lot of conversations around training and workforce to make sure that we're offering opportunities that will make sense for Durham residents. We know that there's a benefits cliff that Durham residents often will encounter as they're considering going back into the workplace. And so we want to make sure that we're mindful of that and that the work opportunities that we are training people for are really going to help offset some of the benefits that they might lose as a result of their future employment. So we've been thinking about all of those things. And then finally, I would just say we're working to refine the data, making sure that we're capturing every single piece of spend, whether it's coming from our general contractors or from the city or any of their partner agencies. So we have a little bit of work left to do to particularly collect some of the data around spend with professional services groups that might not be directly related to the actual boots on the ground construction, but they're still part of the spend and they're still very much part of what it takes to build small businesses in a community like Durham. And so we want to make sure that we're capturing all those numbers before we start to communicate out to the public where we are. And so our next step is just going to be to refine the data as we've received it so far, ask for some more data and ask some really interesting and important questions before we start counting participation. And then we'll continue to explore training and hiring opportunities and partnerships in the community. And then we've identified a couple of really more imminent next steps we believe that it's time for us to have some outreach to engage with the public. And so we've set a tentative date in early February to start just doing some general outreach to the public. Depending on how the world of COVID-19 is, that will be virtual or in person, but we're leaning towards virtual right now. And then we are planning to offer a training to the general contractors on January 26th that will give them some formal instruction on how we expect their reporting to come in each month. We feel like that's only fair for us to give them some very specific guidance on that so that they can submit everything to us properly moving forward. So that's kind of what we've been working on for the last few months. It's been exciting, and the process has been really interesting and engaging for us to get to know better some of the general contractors, developers, and the subcontractors that are already working on these projects and hoping to work on these projects in the future. So.
I have a question, if I could. So one of the things that I think has been really important in this, and you mentioned it, and I'd like for you to just speak to a little bit more if you could, is the benefits cliff issue. That's particularly a challenge for our residents in DHA properties because it impacts everything from their rent costs to any other types of assistance they're getting. Could you just maybe speak to that a little bit more? I want to make sure everyone understands this issue and why it's important.
Yeah, so some of the really valuable feedback at one of the first kind of brainstorming sessions that we had with Durham Housing Authority highlighted the fact that many of the residents are reluctant to go out and seek, opportunities for work if that work will not offset the benefits that they will lose. And so we are just exploring, what training makes the most sense, what career opportunities make the most sense. We just don't feel like it's worthwhile for us to train people on how to become a day laborer or somebody on a project that's not earning a wage that's going to really compensate for benefits that they might lose. So we've been exploring, what kind of training makes the most sense, if it is even construction related. Again, because we know that we're dealing with some women and mothers who maybe can't even meet the demands of a construction schedule, having to be up at 6 a.m. in the morning and get kids off to where they need to be. So we've been exploring just what training makes the most sense and what compensation and pay makes the most sense also. And then the last thing is that I've worked on some other projects for other public agencies, and they've actually instituted minimum salaries, minimum hourly salaries, even just to make sure that they're compensating folks and considering the benefits cliff. So I think we're still in the process of kind of vetting out options, but we'd certainly love to get advice from this group and others. And so we've just been at each meeting interviewing and kind of meeting with different agencies and businesses that offer training and seeing which one feels like the right fit and still meets all of that criteria.
Thank you for that. Oh, go ahead.
So thank you, Ms. Gilmore-Haley, for your talking points here. I just want to make sure that I heard you right. What I heard, Dr. Scott. There's a concern by the residents that if they make too much money, that they will lose out on the benefits that they currently have in order for them to stay in housing, correct?
No.
Clarification.
It's almost the opposite. It's too little money. So if you make a certain amount of money that's not enough, then you end up losing more of your benefits than what you're earning in your salary. So it creates this challenge, and that's why she was referring to making sure that the jobs that they're targeting have a high enough wage that you are actually benefiting by going to work rather than losing from going to work.
And would that, I'm assuming this is part-time employment, temporary employment, not necessarily full-time and salaried employment, is hourly money, right?
In the construction industry specifically, it's more often entry-level employees are at an hourly rate. And our goal would, of course, be for this to be full-time employment and permanent employment, but certainly we wouldn't have very much control over that with the different trade partners or subcontractors that might be hiring. But we feel like it's important to lay that criteria out on the table and let the subcontractors know before they get into this process, because we don't want them to think, oh, I'll just hire someone for the extent of this project, and as soon as this project is over, I'm going to fire them. And so what we're looking to do is develop a program and criteria that spells that out clearly, that we want this to be a long-term commitment. We want these to be, career opportunities and not just jobs. And then we also want this to be these opportunities to be ones that residents feel like it's been worthwhile if in fact they do lose benefits.
I would think that my biggest concern would be that there would be residents who might not want to seek employment because if they make too much money, that they would lose out on benefits that they have now. And I don't know whether or not there's a minimum to be in DHA, DHA property or not. That it would actually be reversed, that you would have less people seeking work, which is what we see right now in this country, is we have less people seeking employment, and for whatever reason. I would have thought that it would have been the flip, that there was a concern if I make too much money, I'm actually going to lose my housing and lose like certain benefits, rather than it be if I'm making less money, I'm actually going to lose. That's good.
I think what we've seen with the pandemic is that people have a choice now, and we just want to make sure that the choices we offer the residents are actually very attractive and long-term, and not just something that might, end up disrupting their life more than it is contributing to it. So.
And just for clarity, if I could, it's not an issue of not being eligible for DHA housing, because our actual entry point is 80% of the area median income. So that's quite a high bar for folks. And remember that our rents are based on what you earn. So it's a percentage of what you earn. So making too much money is not generally going to be a big issue for DHA, because our hurdle is pretty high.
And Mr. Barnes, if I may add, in the information that we're finding, this cliff affects people at different points, depending on how many people are in their family. There's a lot of different, depending upon what additional benefits they have. And so we're trying to somewhat get a good feel for all of that, so that we can match them up with the right employer that can also advance them at the proper time, so that as they're making this advancement in it, if they're in jeopardy of losing a benefit, their compensation will cover that.
I appreciate that, Ms. Jones. That's the most important thing, is that we want to make sure folks have opportunities to transition out of DHA housing. It should not be generational. It should be transitional, right? And so I think that that's very important, that we are lining up future employers to think long-term instead of a short-term gain with the residents that will be afforded an opportunity to work. Thank you for what y'all do.
We have two questions in the chat. One from Venice. Can your team please drop email addresses and links again in the chat for the UMCNC team? And also from John, how do you measure success and participation of involving local residents in the process?
There actually aren't any goals specifically in terms of training local residents, but there are Section 3 goals that are where we are required to meet on some of the projects. And those goals are assigned to us by the the Housing and Urban Development. So federal government has instituted what those goals will be. But we, I think that training, although it's something that necessarily doesn't have a metric assigned to it, I think for us, it would certainly be, it would make sense for us to identify some KPIs like, how many residents are successfully completing the program, how many of them are getting employed and remaining employed. So those kinds of things, but we don't have any program constituted goals around the training program specifically, but definitely around hiring of residents. There are goals that have been given to us by the government on some of the projects, but not all. And for those that are unaware, the Section 3 goals on the projects that it does apply to is 5% for targeted Section 3 and 20% for Section 3.
Perfect, thank you. And I believe we have everything in the chat. Are there any additional questions from the committee? If not, we will move forward with the DataWorks presentation, market presentation.
John, am I uploading or are you uploading?
I was just about to share my screen.
Go ahead on, help yourself.
Thank you. And thank you, Tiffany, too. It's great to be with you all tonight. I know we have a brief window of time with you here. So we're going to go through a bit of information regarding housing, obviously. This is part of a bigger presentation that we've pulled together of recent learnings, like, the last 2 years or so of what we think is significant from working with community groups and just watching data closely. But I'm John Killeen. I'm with DataWorks NC. Mad Bankson is also here with me. Tim Stallman, who's on this call, has helped us with this as well, but may have to leave early. So Mad and I are going to be running these slides and talking with you. For reference, I think Juliet shared a PDF of the full presentation, which includes much more than what we'll share with you tonight. But we would be glad to talk more about these points going forward in the future at a point when there's more time for you all. So just keep that in mind as well, if that's helpful. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just get started here. Again, this is sort of a collection of themes and ideas that have struck us as being pretty important for the broader community to be aware of. We're going to be sharing a few things related to population and demographic change in brief, including decennial census information, increasing rental costs, evictions, and housing supply and corporate investment ideas and information related to those. Let's see. Oops, sorry. There we go. So key themes around what's happening with population change that are essential to understand in this setting. Obviously, Durham's population is growing. It grew by 57,000 folks or so in the last 10 years. Among the changes in demographics we've experienced is a substantially different, a larger increase in the white population, white non-Latinx or Latino population in Durham compared to North Carolina and the nation as a whole. Most people moving to Durham during this past decade have been those in the income bracket of making 500% or more of the poverty level. And so that's the highest income category, so 500% and above. And that category of income groups now is about 40% of our population as a whole as well. And a large number of people also leave Durham every day. We've all talked for a while about how there are people arriving here every day, 10, 20, 30 people, different numbers float around. But in using IRS county to county migration data from 2019, we see that there is about 36 households per day moving here and 34 leaving. There's a very dynamic push and pull tension about migration. A lot of people leave for different reasons. A lot of people come here for different reasons. And that's an important piece of the puzzle to kind of be aware of if we can't get a much closer read on it, to just know that there is that happening. I'm going to pass it over to Matt Bankson to say a few more things.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mad Bankson. I study eviction and property ownership with DataWorks. I'm going to talk about eviction. So in a typical year, Durham landlords file anywhere between 1,000 and 1,500 evictions per month. Of course, we know 2020 and 2021 have been anything but typical years, evictions included. So federal and state eviction moratoria that were imposed due to COVID did prevent a large number of evictions related to non-payment. But it's important to note that even though there were far fewer evictions, just a few landlords crop up over and over in our eviction data. So during the pandemic, most of these high eviction landlords are corporations from out of town, which own many multifamily apartment complexes across several states. And they'll typically evict a few dozen people every month each, and their mass eviction activity largely continued despite the moratoria. So since the moratorium ended, however, most evictions have been filed by established local landlords, so sort of a different set than what we've been seeing. And in the coming months, we really anticipate that evictions are going to meet or surpass their pre-pandemic rate of at least 1,000 per month. In December, we saw 401 summary ejectments, which is in line with this projection. And January is historically the worst month for eviction, unfortunately. And second here. So as I said in the previous slides, large apartment complexes are the places where residents are experiencing eviction in the highest volumes. So we spend a whole lot of time tracking the spatial distribution of evictions. So if you're interested in specific complexes or landlords, definitely subscribe to our monthly newsletter where we talk about these things at length, and we'll link to some more resources at the end as well. But the gist is that evictions are most heavily concentrated at complexes owned by these corporate multifamily landlords who have little accountability to our community and are more about maximizing profits. So in addition to these eviction hotspots, I pointed out just a couple complexes here. It's important to know that there are some neighborhoods with mostly single family and duplex housing that are disproportionately affected by eviction. So this is true of East Durham in general. You can sort of see a vague purple wash in that area. But especially also near Grant Street and in the neighborhoods surrounding North Carolina Central University. It doesn't show up quite as clearly on this map because they're not all at the same address, but those are very high eviction areas. So this sheer number of evictions that we talked about can be really shocking. It's really tragic. And it's important to remember that every one of these data points represents a household that's experiencing a really unjust and traumatic experience. And a lot of these evictions are preventable with proper social assistance programs and legal representation. Next slide. Thank you. I'm just gonna talk quickly about rent costs. We're all pretty aware, based off our lived experience and what we've been hearing, the cost of housing in Durham is really going up. It can be hard to say by how much. So here what we did is scrape some rental listing data from Craigslist. This chart shows the median cost of housing broken up by the number of bedrooms in the house. So each line is 1, 2, 3, 4 bedrooms. The most remarkable thing about rent price trends that we see here is that while rents have been steadily increasing for years, prices have really skyrocketed since the beginning of COVID around March 2020. There are many reasons for that, including the aforementioned demographic shifts, and increasing corporate landlording and lack of available supply are also factors. I'll pass it back off to John here to talk a little bit about wages.
Thanks, Matt. Going into the pandemic, we have another long existing story. I'm just going to spend a moment on this because I think most of us recognize this. But in the past 20 years, wages for a lot of folks in Durham have been very stagnant, and even with inflation adjustment decreasing. So this is just a representation of weekly wages compared to median gross rent in the county for folks working in the healthcare sector. So you can see for surgeons, specialists, home health, dental, and so on, in the top range of the incomes, those have actually increased if you account for inflation. Whereas for nursing, community food, housing, vocational rehab, and childcare, they've decreased over the last 2 decades. So while rents have increased, as Mad's just shown us, greatly over the last 1.5 to 2 years, this is a story that affects people with lower wages, obviously much more dramatically. And that section of our economy has grown a lot too, with sectors like this and the food service and accommodation sector growing the most over the last 20 years. One of the things we want to spend the most time talking about with you, though, is just this concept of area median income, which I know you're all very familiar with, and it won't strike you as outside of y'all's wheelhouse to see that the area median incomes are around 86,000 for the most recent data from HUD, which comes from the American Community Survey. Prior, it was about 90,000, changes each year. So if we're going to base our affordability thresholds, as we do mostly right now, on the area median income, which includes Chapel Hill, we're going to be looking at 180, 60, 30% of $86,000 in this case. And that leads to affordable monthly housing costs that are in that first yellow column there that show for a family that makes 60% of the area median income, a $1,300 a month housing cost would be called affordable. But what we know is actually that in Durham County, the median income is much lower. So it's 58,000 for all folks considered. And but when we're actually talking about specific communities and neighborhoods, that can be very dramatically different too. And because the legacy of segregation and racism here, like everywhere in America, median income and affordability differs widely across neighborhoods within Durham. So in the example of Bragtown, the median income is 33,000 or so. And if you wanted to prepare or build and dedicate housing that's affordable at those 80, 60, and 30% of median income ranges for folks that live in Bragtown, you would be looking at that $674, $505, $253 a month as being affordable costs. It's worth noting that the $253 a month cost is really akin to what folks who live in DHA properties might pay, which I think Dr. Scott could correct me, but I think it's about $220 a month is the average rent for DHA tenants. But because the median household income as a whole for people differs so widely by race, setting the affordability threshold this high will by default exclude whole groups. So for example, white people in Durham County have a median household income a little over $80,000, while Black residents have a median income of about $44,000. This is a very brief slide, just to reference again, like you all know very well, home sale prices have also increased dramatically in recent time. And that's just something we want to put a flag in with y'all tonight, but we take more time in a broader presentation about that. The next point I want to make is just about supply too. We do often think about supply and its influence. And in a broad sense, just using census data, decennial census data for the last 3 iterations of that, we can see that the number of people per household unit has increased, but only slightly. So it's 2.23 people per household back in 2000. It's 2.25 currently. That just means that building hasn't quite kept pace with population growth, but we haven't seen a massive shift here. You can see that it's roughly flat, with 2010 being different. There was a larger increase in the number of household units than there was in population in that decade. So what we don't really have is good local data on vacancy, which would allow us to understand to what extent there's a shortage in housing overall versus a shortage in specifically affordable housing or certain types of housing. I'm going to pass it back to Matt now.
Thanks, John. So like John said, it's really unclear to what extent limited supply actually drives lack of affordability based on the data we have. But what we do know is that corporate investment is a really big part of the reason why there's so much competition for home buyers right now, and that trickles down to renters. So what am I talking about when I refer to corporate real estate investment? It's been in the news a lot lately. Corporate investors can include limited liability corporations, limited partnerships, trusts, and other companies that purchase homes to make money either from collecting rent or eventually selling the property at a profit. Corporate investment has really been on the rise over the past 20 years. So to give some context, about 4% of Durham residential properties that were sold in the year 2000 were purchased by investors. Over this past year, the corporate purchase rate was about 15%. This is happening all over the country, but it has really accelerated in the Triangle lately because we have such a hot real estate market. So to put it really simply, out of all of the homes purchased, about 1 in 6 is being bought by an investor. This means there are fewer homes available for regular people to purchase, especially if you don't have access to serious wealth to put down a down payment. Corporate speculation also, if you're sensing a theme here, doesn't impact all of Durham's neighborhoods in the same way. Black neighborhoods in Durham are experiencing the highest rates of corporate investment, and that limits people's ability to buy homes. Old East Durham and the neighborhoods surrounding Central had the highest ratio of investor purchase properties. And at the same time, white neighborhoods like Hope Valley and the subdivisions west of 15501 saw the lowest rates of corporate investment, likely because a lot of the people in those areas are already homeowners. So by purchasing a lot of the available housing stock, especially starter homes and homes in Black neighborhoods, corporations are creating a situation in which it's becoming more and more difficult to become a homeowner for working people. And as we mentioned before, renters are more vulnerable to eviction and displacement, kind of kicking the can down the road. This also directly contributes to the racial wealth gap by undermining a key opportunity to build equity through homeownership. If you're interested in learning more about this, the Durham Compass does track out-of-state ownership, and you can look very clearly what parts of the city are impacted by this. I really encourage everybody to check that out. And with that, I will pass it back to John.
Thanks, Matt. The last slide here, and you'll have it in the PDF that you get of this slide deck too, has a link to the Durham Compass for those who haven't looked at it yet or don't have a link to it. We can also put that in the chat now, though. So just for our closing with y'all right now, if there is possible time for Q&A or for just reflections from the group too, these are some of the questions that we're coming out of this range of ideas from, and this sort of collection of data points. To what extent is there a housing shortage in Durham? And if so, where? What kinds of specific housing is there a shortage of? And more specifically, for who? Who are the people that are most in need of housing that don't have it currently? Who owns rental housing now? Who should own rental housing now? Given what Matt just told us about corporate acquisitions for investment purposes and the volatility of that for people that live here, what does a different version of that look like? What's a more appropriate measure for affordability than the Durham Chapel Hill AMI? And how much can we pursue one when we look into projects that are subsidized, or when we build projects that are subsidized and finance them? And then what can Durham do to stop evictions and address the underlying issues driving unaffordability? This is sort of the space that we're sitting on a lot right now, and we thought it would be important to share this with you. So we're grateful for your time. If there's space for discussion, we would love to be part of that. If it's not now, then we're sort of on call to participate in the future in that regard. So thank you so much for your time. Again, the Durham Compass is actually compass.durhamnc.gov. That is also in the chat there. You can see that Matt put that there. And our email addresses I put in the chat too just a few moments ago. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much to the DataWorks team. And we are ahead of schedule, so we do have time for questions from the committee. There is one in the chat that we can start with from Albert Avery. A couple, actually. One, does DataWorks make any recommendations or primarily stick with assembling data without politicizing the data?
We can take them one by one, maybe, I guess. Yeah, that's a good one. We are not often making recommendations. There are some particular gaps that we've identified, I think, that are worth discussing, specifically in regard to public ownership of property and public retention of land. One of the things that is apparent is that the only paths to rent control, for instance, are through either public ownership, which could also include like long-term leases to nonprofit management, and then CDBG and other subsidized funding streams being tied to a project, which are oftentimes used as like trading pieces for getting developers to provide a certain number of affordable units. But I think the aspect of long-term public retention of properties gives rent control space that can actually be done then. So that's just something that I think it's not really on the table a lot these days, and it's not really part of industry standards at this point. But it's just worth putting out there. So in terms of other recommendations, there's a lot of detail out here. You all know it very well. Every project, every program rather, and every funding source has its own very specific and arcane rules. Some of them you hear from tonight, from Dr. Scott too, and others, things that have to be minded really closely, and there might be consequences that could jeopardize them. But I think the creativity and the leadership that can come from a locality or several localities in a state acting together in unison could be important. While I'm at it, I guess, Tiffany, I'll just jump in on that second question. Does DataWorks collect data on violent crime and other forms of crime by location, age of offender, race, income of neighborhood, or any other data points? You can find a lot of that information in the Durham Compass, and I would encourage you to go there and browse through what the variables are that are in it. I'm glad to do a little demo on that project and that website sometime with y'all too. Specifically on violent crime, that the information about crime categories is a little bit dated in that website right now. Some of that's been through hardship in getting access to records, but also we've done some workshopping lately around what safety, it's in the safety section of that website. You all know well too that there's a rich discussion happening on what safety truly means for different people in Durham. And we want that website to really reflect the different perspectives of that. So right now we're kind of learning more about what those measurements should be before updating the crime data specifically in that website, if that's helpful.
Perfect, thank you. Are there additional questions from the committee?
Yeah, I'd just like to add on some anecdotal things. We do have some realtors on that are a part of the committee that I'm sure it's not in the statistics, but we do see quite a few properties that come on the market receiving offers before they're actually in the MLS available for sale. We also see investors that have they've drawn a circle around where the Apple campus is going to be, and anything that meets the criteria within that circle is going to get an offer from these out-of-state investors. So there really is a tremendous market force with it. And just anecdotally, we've seen, I think the prices have been elevated in the last year, but even though the overall market has come up to where the elevated sales were last year, we're still continuing to see prices going up again. So it looks in the next year that there's no end in sight to the prices of price pressure going up. Courtney or Jarvis or Tiffany, do y'all have anything to say about that?
I was just going to say, and I'm sorry, I've got lots of activity in my house right now, so I apologize for the background noise, but I am so glad that you guys are bringing attention to this, because the institutional investors is something that I think, especially looking at other cities in the Southeast like Atlanta, and I think we are on the low end of this, and it's probably the one issue I am most scared of in terms of impacting the real estate market here. So I'm really glad that you guys are looking at it.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of jump in on that. First of all, John and Matt, I appreciate the presentation, and I want to extend the invitation on behalf of the Citizens Advisory Committee to present this slide to that committee. I think that would be very helpful for that body. This is why I believe in having local rule be able to govern rents and things of that nature, and not allow the state, because a lot of this stuff is state controlled and we can't create things because the state has different regulations. I did want to talk about evictions real quick. We have seen lately how folks are being told 7 days, they have 7 days to leave a residence, but they've, even though they've paid their rent on time and things of that nature. Are there any safety measures or renters' rights when it comes to things like that? I know that most people who rent, you have to give apartment complexes or management 60 days notice if you're gonna move, which to me is crazy. But yet they can only give you 7 days before they. How is that even fair? Is there any protections there?
I might just touch on this briefly before, I know there are other folks on the call too that have a lot of expertise in this as well. But a lot has been changing in the last couple of years in terms of the structure of leases too in this town. So baseline, if it's, unless a tenant doesn't pay the rent or violates the lease in some way, there's not really a justified reason to kick them out. There is recourse for a tenant in that case legally, but I think, are these, there are 7-day notices, but is that following the settlement of a summary ejectment and a writ of possession being issued by the magistrate, or is it just like straight up private between landlord and tenant?
Well, I mean, I think I've noticed lately that, the landlord has sold the property.
Yeah, there's been a big case of that lately, yeah.
Been a big, huge case of I'm selling the property. I'm going to be doing something else different with the property.
Yeah.
Or, you have to leave. And you're hearing that, these landlords are going to be helping them find residents, which we know at the end of the day is, that's
no accountability there. Yeah.
Right. So, my issue is like, yeah, we know that the rents are going up. They're going to stay up. What are the protections of a renter?
Yeah. In those two cases. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Tiffany.
Oh, if I can chime in just super quick, and I'll lean to my other realtor colleagues to join me on this. Typically, if a property conveys in North Carolina, the new owner is bound to the terms of any existing lease that's in place. The challenge is, let's say you have a 1-year lease and you don't renew it into a new 1-year lease at the end of the term, and it just by default becomes a 30-day month-to-month lease, then certain protections that you had under that 1-year lease, you don't have. And to take it a step further, there are a lot of leases in our market that are week to week. So your protections get shrunk even more in some of those cases. So, in my opinion, I always tell people, hey, when your lease renewal comes up, get a full year lease renewal. Don't just default to a month to month, although I know that some tenants like the freedom of being able to move quickly and not be tied down, but that goes both ways. That gives your landlord that same leeway as well. That is coming from non-attorney Tiffany, just sharing a little bit of knowledge.
One last follow-up, I'm sorry. What is the rules on co-oping? I'm from New York City, and co-oping is huge in the city, and it gives tenants the ability to own. What is North Carolina's stance on co-oping? Is that something that is an option in Durham where we might be able to give those tenants an opportunity to own?
Glad to let others speak to this as well, but it is possible. There are some that exist. There is one downtown that's just been finished in the last couple of years, and I think there's another one being built in West Durham specifically for aging folks, but private, not subsidized in any way, but cooperative. I know of others around in the region, but it is possible. But I see others' hands up, and I'd be glad to defer to the rest of the group.
I can speak to it, but I saw Leo Williams had his hand up too. So I don't know if you want to go first.
Well, speaking of Leo, I would like to take a second just to introduce and thank Councilman Leonardo Williams and Councilwoman Deidreana Freeman. If you both could share a couple words and/or any questions that you have. Councilman Williams?
Sorry, I was trying to mute the other Zoom call that I'm on. Good evening, everybody, and it's great to be here. And I think this is going to be one of my favorite groups to be a part of, as we noticed that, in several cases, the dwelling of people is, getting swept right from under them. Now, I'm still doing a little research on the Fair Housing Act, but I believe that you do have to have at least 30 days notice each way on a month-to-month. But I believe the problem in that, Levon, is, and I think Matt just said this, I think there are some landlords that are intentionally placing their folks on 30-day leases, month-to-month rather. And it just gives you that, that flexibility to be able to do whatever you want when you can. And that is a state thing, and I know at the city level, we're going to do all of what we can. I'm still learning. I know Councilmember Freeman has a lot more experience in this than I do. But I can tell you that regarding the Braswell apartment situation, I have been on site every other day in their apartments with them, talking to them, trying to figure out any solution possible. And while we are exhausting the resources that the city has in its coffers, it is a private matter between landlord and tenant. But that shouldn't stop us, right? So I'm now seeking collective action. You know, there are nonprofits that are stepping up and stepping in. And then there are folks that are, there are some landlords across the city that are like, you know what? Partner us with the nonprofit and let us take care of our neighbors. You know, so I will tell you this personally, as ignorant as it may be, I am going to ask our state if they would look at this, you know, this option. And I know it's like, well, what about the landlord's freedom to do month to month? But in the aggressive market that we have right now, we have to protect people. You know, we have to protect the folks that don't have, you know, money just sitting around, or even more so the resources where, you know, you're buying properties that are not even hitting the market. You know, and I keep telling folks, you know, it's not just the poor anymore. I say this often. I own 3 restaurants in this city and I'm renting. I want a house, but I can't afford it. You know, and if I do get a house, I'm going to have to move out of the county right now. And I love Silver Dorm, so I'm going to stay. But it's real out here. And just to hear the stories, you know, and there are some people with a criminal record of over 25 years ago. And that criminal record is still holding them back from getting accepted into a low budget apartment right now. You know, so I'm writing character references. I have 3 that I have to write up for some residents over there. But my other fear is, how many Braswell apartments are there out there right now that we don't know about? You know, so we have a lot of work to do. Thank you for this data. I think that we're going to have to take this presentation and make it consumable for the general public so everybody can realize how real this is. But it's scary out here right now. It really is. And we're going to have to work through policy to strengthen protections for renters and low income. You know, I don't believe that we can ever build enough affordable houses. So we're going to have to look at other measures to get life more affordable in Durham. And there are a lot of ways that we can do that. And it just takes forever. But we got to figure out what is the right now solution, the midterm solution, and thank you for the slides, John, and the long-term solution. All right. So please reach out and collaborate with me. I'm committed to this work. And yeah, thank you for allowing me to be on the call tonight. And I look forward to working with everybody.
And
good evening, everyone. I apologize. I'm also trying to do the dual meetings, and just acknowledging, I appreciate Councilmember Williams' passion. And I mean, you can all hear that compassionate voice. I think a lot of us have been housing advocates. I know I have since 2014, when Miss Louisa Seibel introduced me to the Affordable Housing and Safety Coalition. And working to develop that safe and healthy housing, along with President Barack Obama with HUD. Like, all of this has been kind of trickle. And we know right now we need way more than that because we're behind the gun in a very serious way. I think it relates very clearly to the issues we've been having, because the housing insecurity can lead to a lot of other issues in a community. And so I take it very seriously. I've been leaning on this for years. I know many of you on the call from different conversations over the years, and we know that little has been done to actually address the issue, but a lot of work is going on. And so I look forward to finding the solutions with anyone and who's willing to do the work. So I just want to say that I join you this evening just to say hello and Happy New Year. And to thank you all for being on this call on a Thursday night at almost 8 o'clock. And just know that your work is not in vain and that we are listening. And I'm glad that there were more than one council member on the call tonight, because I think we spent about 5.5 3 of the 5.5 hours in our work session today talking about, tenants' rights and what we need to do to address affordable housing in a very collective way that encourages people to work together, because it's going to take both property owners and tenants. You can't do one without the other. And there's so many spaces and so many conversations. But I really hope that this team focuses on how the funds of the affordable housing bond actually is used in implementing some of those needs. And then also that there are others that come alongside to help with the policy aspects of it too. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Williams and Councilwoman Freeman. I really appreciate that. We appreciate that. We are on schedule to move to our next agenda item, which will then be followed by more discussion time. So if everyone can hold their questions, and Diane, if you can move forward with the feedback from the council presentation.
Oops. Yep. Thanks, Tiffany, and thank you all. And I'm delighted to have so many council members with us this evening. Councilmember Reese did ask me to tell you that he was on the call and he just had to leave. He made it through most of the DataWorks presentation. So what I was going to share with you was, at our last meeting, we shared the PowerPoint that we intended to share with council on November 18th. That was our first 6-month report to council, and it went well. And we got good feedback and questions, and I wanted to share some of that with you. So some of the highlights or follow-up points or comments were around home ownership and the city's second mortgage contract. And Mr. Johnson, perhaps you can correct me, but I believe that's going to council in a couple of weeks.
Yes, it is.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And then Councilmember Johnson had asked about home flippers and predatory buying, some of the same issues that we were discussing earlier, and possible education efforts around that. Yeah, it's not really that, Julia, we can leave that off. Thank you though. Councilmember Reese also had shared some conversations and legal efforts, conversations he's had with the city attorney, particularly looking at some other communities and what they're doing. Colorado apparently sends out advisories on predatory buyers. So these are, things that we're hearing that we might consider suggesting as well. In Atlanta, they have a commercial harassment ordinance. So again, that could be useful. And Councilmember Reese said he'd share some additional comments at our next meeting in March. And again, he was sorry he had to leave. Another point that was raised again, of course, is what is counted toward the affordable housing goals. And Mr. Johnson was going to send a reminder to council, and just for our information, again, to remind us all that units created after July 1, 2019 are counted. Again, normally we look at that output sheet from our goals and then what's in the pipeline or under contract and completed. And also several council members asked if, in a supportive way, I will say, asked if the Community Development Department had adequate capacity and or needed additional resources. So those were some of the highlights. Tiffany, I don't know if you want to share anything, or Mr. Johnson. Anything. But again, they were supportive, and we'll report back again, I believe, in May or something like that.
Perfect. Thank you, Diane.
You're welcome.
Are there any questions from the committee on the prior presentation? And if not, we can open up the floor back to discussion for any of the presentations from this evening from the committee. I am double checking the chat as well. And Juliet, is there anyone in public comments, if we don't have any additional committee comments, that needs to come into the room?
You have 4 attendees and in the public. Would you like me to let them all in? Or
Yes.
would you like to see if they want to speak?
Okay. I would think letting them in should be fine. They're just 4.
Okay, hold on.
At one point, Tiffany, there were 11 people, so a total of
Was.
35. So
Oh,
some
wow.
had to leave. And I do have a note of who they were, so.
Okay.
I'll email later.
All of them should have permission to speak if they need to. So just raise their hands.
Are there any additional questions from committee or public?
Mr. Coleman put something in the chat.
Oh, there was a note. Thank you for allowing the public to join. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Coleman. And there's a note from Juliet that all presentations can be found at the link that was shared. You can also visit the Forever Home Durham site and find links to presentations through that site as well. I think we had a lively conversation earlier that looks like it covered all of the questions from this evening. If there are no additional, we don't want to hold you longer, but again, want to thank you for attending. Thank you to Community Development and to DHA and to UMCNC and to DataWorks for a load of information at this first meeting of the new year. Our next meeting will be March 3rd at 6 p.m. We look forward to seeing everyone there. And that closes us out for this evening. Take care, everyone.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all for a very informative meeting. I'll enjoy it. I'll be back.
Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you.